Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Mike Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, July the 5th of 2022. I want to start off today by talking about the Monster Factory, by which I mean, well, the modern West, and in particular, uh, the United States of America. Sadly, we have a lot more information about the suburban Chicago, Illinois shooter today. And of course, I am reminded in these cases what Marshall McLuhan told us, that violence is the quest for identity. And we have a great many people, particularly young people, but not just young people. This is what McLuhan said: when deprived of his identity, man becomes violent in diverse ways. Violence is the quest for identity. And there are a great many people with no identity, and they do become violent in diverse ways, or just, I suppose, useless, surplus to requirements. This is the latest from Jennifer Smith at the Daily Mail. Highland Park gunman. Oh, yes, Highland Park is John Hughes land. When we think of Chicago, yeah, it's not like that. It's full of nice homes, big, nice homes, and nice, rich people. Highland Park gunman Robert Bobby Cremo dressed up as a woman to carry out yesterday's attack and was able to flee in the crowd because of the disguise, cops revealed Tuesday. Cremo, 21, has not yet been charged for the massacre, but he remains in custody and is speaking with the authorities. And there is a picture of him dressed as a woman with a wig with long hair and a lipstick and eye makeup. Police Tuesday revealed he owned multiple weapons, including two rifles, one that was used in the attack and another that was found in the vehicle when he was arrested at 6:30 p.m. last night. Cremo's motive remains unclear, but police say he had been plotting the attack for weeks. He legally purchased the two rifles along with other guns in the local area, despite a ban on assault rifles in Highland Park, buying them at multiple locations. After the attack Monday, he fled among frightened parade goers, pretending to be one of the victims, and went to his mother's house. Police said they do not think she knew that he was the shooter. When he asked her for her car, she gave it to him and he fled the area. It comes as questions over the gunman's motive, lifestyle, and his obsession with the number 47 arise. Cremo had a 47 tattoo on his cheek, and the numbers are emblazoned on the side of a car. I have noticed in the past that people who are obsessed with prime numbers like 47 tend to be dangerously crazy. Some years ago in Victoria, I was downtown and I was just about to cross the street with the light, and there was a man to the right of me who I wasn't paying enough attention to. And he started making some noise, and I saw that he was holding an empty prescription pill bottle, which he then dashed to the ground and shouted out, 47! You know, these prime numbers have occult significance for some people. On Tuesday, it was revealed Cremo legally purchased a semi-automatic weapon used in the attack, along with one other rifle and more unspecified weapons at a local store. He fired 70 rounds from the roof of a local store before ditching the weapon and running into the crowd himself. Yes. Oh, and there's pictures of him. Yes. This man looks absolutely deranged. He called himself Awake the Rapper. That's another bad sign. And there's a tweet here that says 47, 47, 47, 47. And yes, that's the whole tweet. Just repeat it until he's run out of characters. There's a lot of pictures of Cremo floating around, and in every single picture, he looks insane. Here's one of him at a Trump rally dressed as Where's Waldo? Here's another one of him fiddling around with a chair with a large Trump flag draped over him. He's got a big happy face symbol in one, again with the 44 behind him on a wall, and a headline, Oswald slain. That would be Lee Harvey Oswald. It turns out that a lot of mass killers and serial killers are obsessed with other mass killers and serial killers. It's unclear what the significance of 47 is. It's the date of July the 4th in reverse. The next president will also be the 47th. Cremo is a Trump fan and previously attended his rallies. His parents, including his local politician father, has not yet addressed his role in the massacre, but his uncle said he was a quiet kid who kept largely to himself. Yep, they're still reporting that. They're still reporting that. Paul Cremo, whose uncle has since told how he was behaving normally on Sunday night, normally for Bobby Cremo, perhaps. He claims he showed no signs of violence, despite YouTube rap videos in which he glamorized school shootings. The shooter's motive for yesterday's attack remains unknown. Cremo, his uncle, told CNN, "I'm heartbroken. I'm so heartbroken. There were no signs that I saw that would make him do this. Everything was as normal." Yes. And let's go to heavy.com, which normally has the goods on this. Look, anyone with neck tattoos, and in particular tattoos on the face and the forehead, is not a normal person. According to Heavy, Robert E. Cremo III is an aspiring rapper who is considered a person of interest in the mass shooting at a 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois, where his family has deep ties. Cremo also goes by the name Bobby Cremo. A voluminous social media trail for Cremo has emerged, showing weaponry and an obsession with mass shootings. In 2019, he shared a random video of President Donald Trump's motorcade. How would you say? Shades of Taxi Driver there. Cremo, whose music was recorded under the name Awake the Rapper, was also photographed at a Trump rally. He was believed to be driving a 2010 silver Honda Fit before he was captured. And here's a video that he made of him with a military-style helmet in a mock-up of a school room, I guess school shooting. Cremo's family has long ties to Highland Park. His father ran for mayor, and the current mayor was his Cub Scout leader. And here's more video of him dressed in rapper gear. Cremo's uncle told CNN that Cremo lived in an apartment behind his parents' house after losing his job at Panera during the pandemic. According to Fox News, the current mayor of Highland Park, Nancy Rodering, was Cremo's Cub Scout leader. He was just a little boy then, she told Fox. Cremo's father, Bob, is a small business owner who ran unsuccessfully for Highland Park mayor in 2019. The city is an affluent northern Chicago suburb on Lake Michigan. Cremo's mother, Denise's LinkedIn page lists her as a holistic health practitioner. In a bio, the elder Cremo described himself as self-employed at Bob's Pantry and Deli. "This will be my first time in office as a person for the people, though I have no prior experience in political office. I know the dynamics of Highland Park through my years of experience in business." The father described himself as a local small business owner. Cremo's father wrote that he was self-employed since 1990 due to his ownership of the White Hen in Racine and Bob's Pantry and Deli in Braeside. And here's another picture of him dressed in more rapper gear. YouTube videos emerged in which Cremo refers to himself as a sleepwalker, walking blindly into the night. And it goes on, and I won't repeat it. He also had a blog page with flames as his backdrop. He posted this photo that included the thin blue line flag, which supports law enforcement. He also had a manifesto. One man who saw it wrote that it is 28 pages long and is composed entirely of an undeciphered sequence of numbers. There is a coinciding video to Arcturus on YouTube, which is composed of footage from the music videos to Out of My Mind, Out of This World, and Toy Soldier. The numbers 23, 45, and 115 seem to be of significance in decoding Arcturus. However, Arcturus remains an unsolved mystery. Photos emerged that appear to show him in a Pepe the Frog shirt and at a Trump rally. Pepe the Frog is a symbol associated with the alt-right. And Cremo was a fairly popular rapper with a Spotify account, and here's a picture of him wearing a jacket and a white tie and a red shirt, rather like Trump. He is also known as Awake the Rapper. One song on his Spotify profile has 2 million listens. One of his videos is called Famous. According to his IMDb account, says the hip-hop phenom, born at 2000, is mostly known for his hit song On My Mind. The track has amassed millions of plays so far across online streaming platforms. Bobby began unloading his music to the internet when he was 11. The lo-fi sad boy then went on to release a second mixtape called Observer on August 10th, 2018, and an EP called The Future is Dope on his 18th birthday. His most recent songs were added May the 13th, 2022. Brainwashed is the top song, and he also has one called I Am the Storm. The profile photo is a cartoon anime character with a gun. Cremo is also has songs called Dead Again and Game Boy, as well as Dumb Diddy Dumb. One of his accounts, he lists himself as a master gunnery sergeant and makes a comment indicating his dislike of black people. Someone had put up a tweet. Here are some of the gore threats made by the Highland Park shooter. Extremely disturbed person. Looks like he'd been collecting death videos for years. Scanner audio reports say the active shooter carried a large yellow army-style backpack. And Just Do It read a tweet on Cremo's page. Now, whenever one of these incidents happens, of course, was he white or was he black? Was he some other color? Was he left wing? Was he right wing? Was he alt-right? Was he Antifa? This is from Kane at Citizen Free Press. Analyzing Robert Cremo's social media psychotic edgelord. Rabid Cats tweeted they've already scrubbed his YouTube and other pages, so recording this to have it in case it is deleted too. But if you go through his follow list and likes, he is definitely a liberal. His friend speaks out. He was not Antifa and he was not a MAGA overlord. This is from One Cow Tools. Hi, I knew Awake the Rapper Robert Bobby Cremo. We used to make music together around 2015 to 2018. He's not Antifa. He's not some MAGA overlord. I know that shit sounds really interesting, but it's not the truth. He was an isolated stoner who completely lost touch with reality. He co-opted aesthetics from the left and right, but I don't think he was any of those things. I think he was lost. Gravitated towards aesthetics he found interesting. Maybe things can change in a couple of years, but he was never a white nationalist and was never a leftist. And there's a bunch of photos, a bunch of tweets, him liking tweets by President Biden. I don't know, maybe he was just going through Twitter and just clicking like, you know, because he was hopped up on Goofenthal. Yes. Cheers as the Trump's motorcade passes by. Yes, perhaps Trump and his motorcade dodged a bullet literally that day. Someone called Styx on YouTube, yes, says that he is a psychotic edgelord. Paul Joseph Watson reports on Summit News, ghoulish battle over possible political motivation of July the 4th shooter begins. Gunmen express both pro-Trump and anti-Trump sentiment. Aside from the usual push for gun control, others have desperately sought clues as to a potential political motive behind the attack. A struggling rapper, Cremo, posted creepy YouTube videos in which he repeated that he was like a sleepwalker that can't be stopped. Haunting YouTube video featuring Highland Park suspect appears to warn of mass shooting attack. Yes, it would appear to be hand-drawn images of people being shot and a 44 symbol. Another bizarre clip from a low-budget rap video shows the shooter in a school classroom. As previously mentioned, it looks like a mock-up to me. Some pointed to the shooter being pictured attending a Trump rally, although, as Mike Cernovich points out, his dressing like the Where's Waldo character suggests he was trolling the event. Other Twitter posts showed that Cremo liked numerous tweets that called for the arrest of every Congress member who helped organize January the 6th. Anyone who is telling you that this alleged shooter in Chicago is Antifa is lying for the benefit of the saps they milk for cash, says Jason Wilson. The people you should trust on this will be openly saying that this situation is complex, hard to parse, and if it's political, it's not in any straightforward way. Watson comments, what's pretty certain is that the shooter's physiognomy certainly isn't stereotypically that of a Trump supporter or a conservative. Young people with gaunt appearances, face tattoos, and multicolored hair normally don't consider themselves to be very conservative. Ian Miles Chung tweeted, I think Robert Cremo was a psycho, planned it all out to look like he's both a Trump supporter and a Biden supporter, perhaps a true accelerationist. He's got everyone squabbling over his politics, but at the end of the day, he killed innocents and represents no one but himself. Watson concludes, beyond any political motivation, it's clearly another product of the sickness that currently envelops of America as a result of the decline of Christianity and its replacement with atomization and moral relativism. It's also virtually guaranteed that Cremo was on psychiatric drugs, which have become a macabre hallmark of mass shootings. Yes, and from the U.S. Sun, Robert Cremo shared shock beheading video despite Highland Park suspect's family, saying there were no warning signs. Were they interested in warning signs? Apparently, this guy was posting music starting 11 years ago. Did they look at any of the things that he posted? Again, it's become almost de rigueur now for parents to abandon the upbringing of their children around the time that these children reach puberty. Oh, it's none of our business, or the schools will take care of it, or we have our own lives to lead, or we don't want to say to our children, and I know a lot of parents are frightened of this, we don't want to say to our children, stop doing this, stop seeing these people, stop listening to this or watching us, because they're afraid of complaints to guidance counselors and social workers. And of course, Alex Berenson has a close interest in this story. He tweets, yes, he was an isolated stoner who completely lost touch with reality. Cremo was known, at least locally, in what's called the lo-fi rap community, and there are enough pictures of him online for the last several years that anyone who cares to look can see the change in him. Not the tattoos, those are obvious. I mean the way his eyes go flat and dead and vacant. THC in high doses is just slow-acting brain poison, not even particularly slow-acting if the doses are really high. People have known this for centuries. We just had a very sophisticated pressure campaign over the last 30 years that made us forget it. Peter Hitchens has pointed out many times that these so-called senseless crimes, many of which are committed by Muslims in Europe, there are almost always drugs involved, cannabis and SSRIs, or both. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Anran, Brian Frakes, Dan, Oscar Toe. Chogan666 says, what is it when every joint in your body seems to hurt? I hope it's not long COVID. Little Popcasso 88. Brian Frakes says, such a purdy goyle. Hello to Dan Allison. And is Cremo perchance a drag queen storyteller? Oscar Toe asks, 47 is the new 666. Hauper says, what's the frequency, Kenneth? Tell us the frequency. That's a reference to an REM song, which is about some lunatic attacking Dan Rather. That's what he shouted. Hello to Dionysus, Metal Mike. Andrea Horwath's kid is also a tattooed insane rapper who loves guns. Yes, I mentioned him the other day that when he first became known a couple of elections ago in Ontario, he seemed to be very much at odds with his mother's message. And I think the media stopped reporting on him because it was too embarrassing to his mother. Chokin 666 says Oswald was a deep cover operative who was left out to dry, in my opinion. Well, I recommend Gerald Posner's book, A Case Closed, where he argues exceedingly pervasively that Oswald was exactly as he appeared. He was a communist, and in particular an admirer of Fidel Castro, who killed Kennedy because Kennedy was trying to kill Castro. Most of the new rappers have face and neck tattoos. Oscar Toe. I suppose you could have a betting line. You know, this fellow Machine Gun Kelly. I mean, how many days is it before this fellow is going to be dead, one way or the other? Anrun tells us Grace Slick was born in Highland Park. Hello to Tom Anderson. Palpgasso88 says physiognomy is real, especially in this case. Indeed, it is. Calix Rose says, I used to love white hens. You could get a deli sandwich and a drink. His fan club had 218 followers on Twitter, says Dan. Millions of plays, asks Oscar Toe suspiciously. Rustin Shackelford, hello, says, Cremo's a Sex Walker video sounded like it was a monologue from Metal Gear Solid. Dan Allison asks, does everyone in Chicago use dope to mean good? Oscar Toe says, we just used to blame it on the music or video games back in the more innocent times. Well, I'm reminded of this fellow, that this big brain, this deep thinker from Israel called Harari, who believes that humans can be hacked and should be hacked. His full name is Yuval Noah Harari. And he believes that the vast amount of humanity is useless eaters. That's the term that he uses. And they should be pacified with video games and drugs. How's that worked out so far? Not too well, I'd say. Kevin, are you going to talk about the Canadian health? Yes, I am going to talk about that, William Hicks. Tom Anderson says the idea that drug prohibition doesn't work is simply false. In Britain, cannabis is legal and they have far lower rates of use than America and Canada. When things are made legal, what was it that the pastor said on The Simpsons? Re-gambling? If the government makes it legal, it can't be a sin anymore. This idea about violence being a quest for identity is very interesting. Indeed, it is. Any data on whether or not potheads are statistically overrepresented in commission of violent crimes, you can find that data in Alex Berenson's book, Tell Your Children. We have this epidemic of schizophrenia and what's it called? Schizoform identity or some such thing. And we do know one thing about schizophrenics that is very relevant. They are 17 times more likely to murder than people who are not schizophrenics. Halpers reminds us that Oswald was in Mexico at the Cuban embassy, trying and failing to get into Cuba shortly before going to Dallas. I think the Soviets just mocked him when he was there, says Oscar Toe. There's a lot of great stuff about Oswald in Edward J. Epstein's book, Legend, which I also highly recommend. Here's an essay from the Institute for Family Studies by Christopher Fain Lehman. It's called Pot and Pathology. Over the past several decades, America has undergone a marijuana revolution. In 2003, just 1 in 3 Americans supported legalization, and recreational pot was illegal nationwide. Today, 2 in 3 support legalization, including a majority of Republicans and regular churchgoers. Recreational use is legal in 19 states and the District of Columbia, while a further 18 states permit medical marijuana, often under highly permissive regimes, I'll say. But while marijuana has become widely available, public debate has remained stuck in the past, endlessly repeating decades-old talking points. Because of that, we are only now beginning to understand the social implications of the heavy consumption of marijuana by a subset of the population, a pattern which almost certainly contributes to, among other things, the malaise that has settled over contemporary singlehood. Remarkably, as marijuana has become more abundant, the share of the population with exposure to it has held roughly steady. In 2002, about 40.5% of Americans over 12 had ever used marijuana. Today, that figure is 45%. Advocates of legalization point to this, along with the fact that the share of high schoolers who report marijuana use is roughly flat, as evidence that legalization had little impact on actual consumption, contrary to opponents' fears. While it's true that the number of people reporting marijuana use has not changed dramatically, that does not mean that the volume being used has not increased. In fact, as drug policy expert Keith Humphreys recently noted, the number of daily users has risen dramatically since the early 1990s. I partially replicate Humphrey's chart above, taken from a presentation by Jonathan Calkins, a drug policy scholar and professor of operations research at Carnegie Mellon. Using data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, it shows that the number of heavy users has grown much faster than either the total number of users or the population as a whole. In 2020, there were about 1.18 times as many Americans ages 12 and up as there were in 2002, but there were 2.26 times as many Americans who used marijuana 10 days a month or more. Not only are there more marijuana users, but they are using much more heavily. In 2020, there were about 1.18 times as many Americans as there were in 2002. The total number of days of use is more than double what it was in 2002, hitting a maximum ratio of 2.44 in 2019. In other words, the amount of time Americans are spending using marijuana has grown much faster than either the number of marijuana users or the population. Marijuana use has not really grown much in extent, but has grown dramatically in intensity. All of this, of course, has significant individual and social implications. Marijuana is still thought by some to be harmless and non-addicting, but about 10% who use will develop a marijuana use disorder, characterized by continued use in spite of negative impact on one's life and health, and which is associated with neuropsychological deficits such as memory and attention problems. In fact, 1 in 3 past month users in the 2020 NSDUH met the criteria for marijuana use disorder. More generally, marijuana is, as Calkins once put it, a performance-degrading drug. Even if one supports the legalization of marijuana, one can reasonably agree that a significant minority of the population being routinely intoxicated, whether it be by alcohol or marijuana, is a public health concern. For example, a recent survey found that 40% of past year users admit to driving under the influence at least once a month. It's worth asking how marijuana use interfaces with marriage and family formation. In the chart above, I break out each marital status group's share of A, the overall population, B, number of past month marijuana users, and C, number of total days of use. In short, marijuana use is far more common among single people relative to their share of the population than among married people. Some of this effect is attributable to age. Younger people use more weed and are less likely to be married, etc. But as the chart above shows, its relationship between marital status and problematic marijuana consumption persists even after controlling for age. At every age level, single Americans are far more likely to have a marijuana use disorder than are their same-age married counterparts. Does this mean that heavy marijuana use causes singleness? Probably not, at least not in isolation. Certainly, any analysis that sought to prove as much would be far more complicated than this. It is just as likely that marriage reduces marijuana use, if for no other reason, that family leaves less time for consumption. And it's still more likely that some underlying set of factors drive both singleness and disordered consumption together. But there is a plausible story whereby marijuana is part of a tangle of pathologies associated with sustained singlehood. for some, compulsive marijuana use, as with any substance, may serve as a way to escape from life's problems, but that avoidant behavior can, in turn, perpetuate those problems. Heavy marijuana use can contribute not only to memory and attention problems, but also to anxiety at high enough doses, lowered motivation, and debatably depression, all conditions which make it harder for those users to overcome their stasis. In a 2018 article on the spread of marijuana use disorder, The Atlantic's Annie Lowry identifies heavy users describing lost jobs, lost marriages, lost houses, lost money, lost time, foreclosures, and divorces. Even if marijuana is not the but for cause of those outcomes, it may have contributed to and reinforced the situation which produced them. And Christopher Fane Lehman, who was a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, concludes, in this regard, the rise in intensive marijuana use is part of a broader deadening of American society. The decline in marriage and child rearing, the rise of opioid or pornography addiction, and the surge in anxiety and depression among young people. As Yuval Levin put it in an essay last year, the challenges to America's social order now seem less like exorbitant human desires driving people's lives out of control, and more like an absence of energy and drive, leaving people languishing and enervated. Marijuana is only part of those challenges, of course, but it is a part nonetheless, a fact too rarely acknowledged. And again, this is from the Institute for Family Studies, which is ifstudies.org. It's by Christopher Fane Lehman. Based on my own observation and what I have read about pot users, particularly famous ones, it is a dreadful mistake for people with depressive personalities to smoke marijuana. Even a small amount of marijuana has terrible effects on them, where they believe that the whole world is watching and judging them badly, laughing at them, mocking them, thinking that they're ugly and stupid, unsuccessful, etc., etc. Of course, as to whether, marijuana causes, things like depression, George Orwell wrote years ago, interesting thought experiment. Is a man a failure because he drinks, or does he drink because he is a failure? It's not a question that's easily answered. But there is so much invested in the cause of marijuana legalization, and also, that hemp is the miracle plant that has 1,001 uses, that these people they're not going to turn around easily. I note that Brian Mulroney, the famous conservative who was a two-term Prime Minister of Canada, is on the board of directors of one of North America's biggest cannabis operations. I just wanted to talk about this fellow because he's sort of an object lesson in uselessness of the man without qualities. This is from Jordan Boyd at The Federalist. Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney had some choice words after two local law enforcement officers were shot at a July the 4th parade, but none of his anger had to do with addressing the rising harm that has plagued the city of brotherly love for years. As a matter of fact, the defund the police Democrats' reaction to the news that two police officers were in the hospital was to express excitement that his mayoral term is ending soon because, quote, there's not an event or a day where I don't lay on my back and look at the ceiling and worry about stuff, unquote. I wonder if he is on SSRIs or other psychoactive medication. I'll be happy when I'm not here, when I'm not mayor, and I can enjoy some stuff, Kenney continued. There's a video of him here, and he's wearing an Emirates soccer jersey. Of course he would be a soccer fan. Specifically, Kenney's waiting for something bad to happen all the time has to do with guns, which he claimed will forever bear the blame for problems in the nation until Americans decide they want to give up the guns and give up the opportunity to get guns. So while the Philadelphia Police Department struggles to grapple with injured officers and the city's record-high homicide rate, which is on track to be much worse in 2022, the mayor is whining about gun control. Philadelphia's crime problem has been going on for years, but Kenney has repeatedly failed to address it. As a matter of fact, during the George Floyd riot era, Kenney made things worse by declining to increase the police budget to reflect the law enforcement needs in the city. After facing pressure to defund the police, Kenney and the city council's preliminary budget in 2020 sought to cut police funding by $14 million at a time when rioters were ransacking and looting small businesses after George Floyd's death. And the number of policemen has declined in Philadelphia. So I decided to look at the wiki entry on this fellow. And his full name is James Francis Kenney, born 1958. And whenever I see that a politician in Canada or the United States is of Irish Catholic extraction, my heart sinks. They may be the very worst. He was first elected mayor of Philadelphia November 3rd, 2015. Before he became mayor, Kenney was a member of the Philadelphia City Council for 23 years, serving as a councilman at large from January 1992. So when he first entered civic office, he's seen his city go straight into the crapper. And all he can do is whine about how he wants to enjoy stuff. Kenney graduated from St. Joseph's Preparatory School in 1976 and received a political science bachelor's degree from LaSalle University, which is a private Catholic institution. He was first elected when he was 32 years old. And if you look at his record, it's rare for one politician to be wrong about everything. But here we go. In 2014, Kenney successfully introduced legislation that ended arrests for possession of small amounts of marijuana. The bill replaced incarceration with the requirement to pay a fine. In advocating for the bill, Kenney had cited the disproportionate effective arrest for small amounts of marijuana on African Americans. Philadelphia became the largest city in the country to decriminalize marijuana, which I'm sure has absolutely nothing to do with its subsequent collapse. Sugary drinks tax. That was a fiasco, but he was the leader there. In 2017, he announced that he was taking back control of the public schools after 16 years of state control. I don't even have to look up how that has worked out. Kenney has supported opening supervised injection sites within the city. In 2018, Philadelphia's public health commissioner, Dr. Thomas Farley, another person of Irish Catholic extraction, announced he wants the city to establish one or more in the city. He cited Vancouver, stating overdose deaths have been reduced. No, they have exploded. Climate change, climate emergency. Yes, a climate emergency and a corona doom emergency. Yeah, okay. And here we go. Kenney has engaged in numerous feuds with the leadership of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Kenney mobilized numerous gay rights legislation during his time in the Philadelphia City Council, many of which were criticized by Catholic leaders. Notably, Kenney joined the debate over the filing of a beloved faculty member at Waldron Mercy Academy in Marion, who came out as gay. In a Philadelphia Inquirer story, Kenney accused the cowardly man in the Archdiocese of orchestrating the firing. Quote, "If you're a church official and you feel that strongly that this woman and her partner are such a threat to society, stand up and say so," Kenney told the paper. In a 2014 tweet, Kenney stated, "The Arch doesn't care about people. It's about image and money. Pope Francis needs to kick some ass here." Yes, a man without qualities. Well, he's still going to be mayor of Philadelphia until, late 2024? So I guess he's got a lot of misery left to endure. This is from Jared Jager at the Post Millennial. Dave Rubin has been suspended from Twitter after the podcaster and commentator defended Jordan Peterson, who had previously been suspended. Yeah. Is Elon Musk paying attention to this? In the post flagged by Twitter, Rubin offered a defense of Peterson after he was suspended for tweeting about actor Elliot Page, using that actor's name prior to Page undergoing gender transition. It seems that the post-millennial is rather frightened of committing the same crime as Peterson did. Oh, they do mention it later on. And let's talk about copium. Copium in the Ukraine. This is from Moon of Alabama. The war in Ukraine is clearly progressing in Russia's favor. This is why I'm appalled by the incompetent descriptions in Western media of past and current operations in that war. Consider a map, a June 21st map of the Lysychansk cauldron as it was developing. The front line extended over 78 miles. 14 days later, and whoop, there's a huge chunk of territory which has been captured by the Russians. The front line has been shortened to 15 miles. On Sunday, the Russia Defense Ministry announced that its troops had liberated 184 square kilometers over the last 24 hours. When I was in the military, my tank battalion was expected to operate on a generally 5-kilometer or 3-mile wide front line. That was, of course, just a rule of thumb depending on the terrain and other circumstances. Russia needed some 25 battalion tactical groups to cover the front line on June 21st. It now needs only 5 to cover the current line. There were and now, of course, additional reserve troops, and some BTCs are rotated out as rested ones come in, just as Russia's president has ordered them to do. Despite this obvious path to progress for the Russian side, the Associated Press headlines, "High cost of Russia gains in Ukraine could limit new advance." The only purported evidence of high Russian costs are the assertion of a military analyst in Ukraine who claims that some Russian units lost half of their soldiers. I've seen nothing that would support such a claim. The AP writer then adds, the limited manpower has forced the Russian commanders to avoid ambitious attempts to encircle large areas in the Donbass, operating for smaller maneuvers and relying on heavy artillery barrages to slowly force the Ukrainians to retreat, unquote. Please, look at the above maps. What did Russia just do? It had made an ambitious attempt to encircle a large area in Donbass and succeeded with the effort in just a few days. The Ukrainian army threw everything it had available into the cauldron and lost thousands of men, while the Russian army avoided direct men against men fighting to minimize its own casualties. So while the Ukrainians will also benefit from now shorter front line, they have lost many soldiers and abandoned lots of equipment during the last weeks and will have difficulties to create any reserves. There's absolutely no reason to believe that the Russian forces are not able to repeat the process over and over. Copium pieces like the AP's have the purpose of claiming that the Ukraine can still win the war and deserves wide support to achieve that. Battlefield reality speaks against it. There is no chance that the Ukraine can gain superiority over the Russian army. No weapon system will help. Any prolonging of the war will lead only to more deaths of Ukrainian soldiers, more wounded who will need care, and more destruction. The only sane thing that can be done now is to press the Ukrainian President Zelensky to restart negotiations with Russia and admit the defeat of his troops. It is much better to capitulate now instead of waiting for the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov to come to Kyiv and make him do so. And there's linked an astonishingly good deep fake video of Kadyrov forcing Zelensky to sign unconditional surrender. And, oh, yeah, okay. This isn't copium exactly. It is from the Associated Press, but you see they're beginning to soften people up for the idea that the Ukraine is a lost cause. This is by Francesca Abel. Torched forest and cities burned to the ground, colleagues with severed limbs, bombardments so relentless the only option is to lie in a trench, wait, and pray. Ukrainian soldiers returning from the front lines in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region where Russia is waging a fierce offensive, described life during what has turned into a grueling war of attrition as apocalyptic. In interviews with the AP, some complained of chaotic organization, desertions, and mental health problems caused by relentless shelling. Others spoke of high morale, their colleagues' heroism, and a commitment to keep fighting even as the better equipped Russians control more of the combat zone. Lieutenant Vladimir Nazarenko, 30, second in command of the Ukrainian National Guard's Svoboda Battalion, was with troops who retreated from Severodonetsk under orders from military leaders. Despite a month-long battle, Russian tanks obliterated any potential defensive positions and turned a city with a pre-war population of 101,000 into a burned-down desert, he said. They shelled us every day. I do not want to lie about it, but these were barrages of ammunition at every building, Nazarenko said. The city was methodically leveled out. At the time, Severodonetsk was one of the two major cities under Ukrainian control in Luhansk province, where pro-Russia separatists declared an unrecognized republic 8 years ago. By the time the order to withdraw came, June the 24th, Ukrainians were surrounded on three sides and mounting a defense from a chemical plant, also sheltering civilians. What are they doing placing their troops with civilians? I can tell you what they're doing. They're doing what they have done since the beginning of this invasion, which is to use civilians as human shields. Artem Ruban, a soldier in Nazarenko's battalion, said if there was a hell on earth somewhere, it was Severodonetsk. The inner strength of our boys allowed them to hold the city until the last moment. Those were not human conditions they had to fight in. It is difficult to explain this to you here, what they feel like now or what it was like there. They were fighting until the end there. The task was destroy the enemy no matter what. On the TV, says another soldier called Elesky, member of the Ukrainian army, who started fighting against the Moscow-backed separatists in 2016, said on the TV they're showing beautiful pictures of the front lines, the solidarity, the army, but the reality is very different. He said, adding that he does not think the delivery of more Western weapons would change the course of the war. It seems to me that the Associated Press has thrown in the towel on this. But let's have an absolutely stupid story, okay? Just for lulz, as the kids like to say, or used to. This is from news.com.au in Australia by Jamie Seidel. And what more can we learn about this Jamie Seidel person? Freelance journalist and digital content producer, striving to bridge the geek-muggle gap. Harry Potter fan. This is a man who looks to be in his 40s or perhaps 50 years old in his Twitter portrait, carrying on about Harry Potter. Warning that Vladimir Putin could invade rest of Europe within a year. Does he really believe that? Russia's invasion of Ukraine shocked the world, with NATO now ramping up its capabilities. But there are fears Vladimir Putin could strike again. Everything changed when Russia invaded Ukraine. Did it? Did everything change? Deterrence was turned on its head. Instead of preventing President Putin from open aggression, the threat of nuclear war shielded him from intervention. Oh, really? Do you think that Europe's NATO troops in Germany, for instance, do you think they're keen to go to the front lines in Ukraine? I don't think that for a minute. Now Europe's worried about worrying that the aging autocrat aims to recreate the long-lost empire of Tsar Peter the Great. Was he going to invade Sweden, or is Sweden going to invade him? Was he going to invade the Ottoman Empire? It's a raw nerve Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky sought to trigger as terrible writing, as Europe's leaders assembled to reset the future of the 30-member NATO alliance. This is Russia's real goal, Zelensky warned Thursday while appealing for aid to stop the Russian army in its tracks. There will either be urgent help for Ukraine enough to win or Russia's postponed war with you. Oh, we're going back to that again. Are we? Like it's the aughts? We're fighting them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here? Really? Next year could be a worse solution, not only Ukraine, but also several other states, possibly members of the alliance. The question is, who is next? It's a very real fear. Sweden and Finland, which maintained their neutrality for the whole Cold War between the West and the Soviet Union, this week had their applications to join the NATO alliance accepted. So apparently they're worried about being invaded by Russia. So their response to this is to join an increasingly aggressive alliance against Russia on Russia's borders. That doesn't sound too clever to me. And President Putin's propagandists have repeatedly stated his objectives to go beyond Ukraine. His apparatchiks have been threatening to invade NATO members Poland and Lithuania. Norway is another target of Moscow's ire, and both the United Kingdom and the United States have been menaced with the specter of a nuclear strike. There's only one catch. Any attack on any one member of the NATO alliance triggers Article 5. Every member state must consider it an assault on itself. The Russian army does not want to stop in Donbass or somewhere in the south of Ukraine, Zelensky stated. It wants to absorb city after city, all of us, and then all in Europe, whom the Russian leadership considers its property, not independent states. This is Russia's real goal. The desperate Ukrainian leader has every motive to talk up the threat, but his words are falling on fertile ground. Yeah, sure they are. Sure they are. As I say, absolutely stupid. The West could have avoided this war easily by insisting that the Minsk Accords be honored. But no, the United States did not want the Ukraine to honor the Minsk Accords because Russia needs to be taught a lesson. Let's go back to the chat. Wow, we got a lot of comments today. Rope, the basis for stasis. Don't do twine, says Chokokin at 666. I saw the murder of Jack Ruby on live TV, and that was quite something. And of course, ever since it happened, people have been saying, the Dallas police, they weren't very good at security, were they? Okay, who else do we have? Responsible and reasonable says, we've heard that already. Schizo is rampant in the Black community, says Ruslan Akhmatov. They were wary enough to put him, that Lee Harvey Oswald, and his wife Marina, his Russian wife Marina, under surveillance for a long time in Minsk, I think, says Halper. Again, the book Legend by Edward J. Epstein is excellent. Hello to Pete Bauman. I was briefly a JFK conspiracist after the movie came out. I was 15, but then I read Posner's book, says Paul Picasso, 88. Something broke, it seems to me, in America when Kennedy was assassinated. There had been presidents who had been assassinated before, but this was different. And a kind of psychic collapse ensued almost immediately. A lot of it was media driven. The media insisted that Kennedy was much more popular than he was, in fact. And of course, right wingers were responsible for Kennedy's assassination. Oberyn Waugh wrote a hilarious book of fiction, science fiction book about the Kennedy assassination and who was responsible for it. The assassination as an attempt to bring about a nuclear war and the end of life on Earth. But no, it's the right wingers. But this guy's a communist. It's the right wingers who did it. Halper says the transcripts are available in the KGB archives. Norman Mailer quoted from them a lot in the book he wrote about Oswald. For an assassination, a Carcano 9138 would not be my weapon of choice, says Brian Frakes. Well, you've never seen Full Metal Jacket? Marine training. E. Howard Hunt told us this on his deathbed, by the way. Didn't even make the news. Was it Bob Woodward who got this deathbed confession? Like he got the deathbed confession from Casey? Oswald wasn't a great assassin. He didn't have a difficult shot on the limo. Well, it was a moving target. It was from several hundred yards away, and he did get 2 hits, including a headshot. I'd say that is that's pretty good shooting. Ruslan Akhmetov says coffee and tea are for winners. Strategically adaptive memeplex says alcohol is a different thing altogether than marijuana. Alcohol has many more social benefits than marijuana. Well, the old joke, which you heard me say before, that people who smoke marijuana, particularly white people, would melt into the furniture. When you bring the THC levels up high enough, they no longer melt into the furniture. They frequently become berserkers or simply vomit continuously. I used to correspond with Tom Bethel, who wrote for Harper's and the American Spectator. He was an investigator for Jim Garrison in New Orleans. He was an Englishman who got his degree from Oxford, and he loved New Orleans jazz, and he came to New Orleans, and someone suggested that he meet Jim Garrison, and Jim Garrison offered him a job as an investigator. He revealed later on that it was he that tipped off Clay Shaw to this farcical arrest. He said one day he was in the office, and one of the other investigators said to him, "You know about the 2 Oswald theory, right?" And Bethel said, "Yeah, of course." "I don't believe in it." "Oh, no, I think there were 3 Oswalds." And Bethel wrote, "It was at that point that I determined that Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone killed JFK. This Oliver Stone movie, JFK, I mean, it has its value as a fever dream. I have to say that. But yeah, if I were looking to kill the president of the United States, particularly in a situation, pretty much a wartime situation, I would not be putting at the center of my conspiracy 2 almost elderly, histrionic homosexuals. No, I would not have them anywhere near the plot. Orwell served as a colonial policeman in Burma, so you know he was smoking twine. Says Chogakin 666. I wanted to show the world that a Jew had guts, said Jack Ruby. This is from Hauper. He died in prison of cancer a few years later. He was a strip club owner, a pimp, connected to organized crime. Brave enough, I suppose. James Jesus or Jesus Angleton. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Really do. There was a TNT movie about the big controversy about Angleton, about whether the CIA had been infiltrated itself by the KGB, and shockingly, this TNT movie came to the conclusion that Angleton was right. Opium trade in China was promoted by the Sassoon clan from Iraq. Yes, I mentioned Siegfried Sassoon last week. He was a member of that clan, but his branch had been disinherited because I think it was what his mother or father had married outside of Judaism. What about Tammany Hall? Irish Catholic Poles like Boss Silent Charlie Murphy. Okay. Well, I'll tell you that my kinsman, William Russell Grace, who was the richest man in the world when he died, the founder of the firm W.R. Grace and Company, he was an immigrant from Ireland, and he was twice elected mayor of New York City in the 1980s, and he ran on an anti-Tammany Hall platform. Ruslan Akhmetov says, Oniswaki Mali Ponce, indeed, indeed. Evil comes to he who thinks it. Who else do we have here? Anybody who I haven't called on before? All right. No. What happened to those red trash who glued themselves to the Last Supper? I'll have something on that later if I have the time. At my local McDonald's, they've removed the self-serve soda dispenser. This follows a strict no refills policy, says Palcaso 88. Inflation, blame Biden, 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 says strategically adaptive meme Plex. The removal of the self-serve soda dispensers is a sign that the U.S. is finished. Ukraine means laundromat in English. That's from Palcaso 88. I would appreciate Ruslan Akhmatov, knock it off with the anti-Semitic remarks if you would. Or just, there's no need to keep using this word over and over again. Okay, I'm going to scroll down to the, Domestic Museum. Hi, Kevin, did you just say Castro killed Kennedy? Well, I said that Kennedy kept trying to kill Castro. I mean, the CIA was absolutely fanatical about it. And of course, there was the humiliating Bay of Pigs fiasco. And of course, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Oh, yes, Cuba has nuclear weapons 90 miles off the coast of the United States. Well, what we weren't told at the time was that the United States had installed similar weapons in Turkey, just across the border from the USSR. And there was a secret agreement. Yes, Khrushchev removed the nuclear weapons from Cuba, but the Americans in turn removed their nuclear weapons from Turkey. Hello to Polygons. Mountain Dew rationing is on the way, says Halper. Gamian says KMG censors chat. That's a first. It was a request, I didn't remove anything. I just, this is, remember, my good taste live stream. Okay. Just keep that in mind. Oh, yes. And what's coming up for Europe this year? Not good. Paul Joseph Watson at summit.news. Hamburg's environment minister has warned Germans that hot water could be rationed and limits on maximum room temperatures introduced as a result of the energy crisis. The state environment minister, Jens Kirsten, announced that the hot water supply for private households could be reduced, reports Deutsche Welle. The district heating grid could act to lower the maximum allowed temperature for households as part of a general lowering of living standards caused by support for the current thing. If there were to be an acute gas shortage, hot water could be made available in an emergency only at certain times of day, he told the paper Welt am Sonntag. As we previously highlighted, Germans are being told to take fewer showers to save energy, with Bild even running an article that suggested washing less makes you smell better. The article was published after Klaus Müller, the head of Germany's Federal Network Agency, asked his fellow countrymen whether you really need to take a hot shower 7 days a week with gas heating. Government Minister Peter Hauk also told Germans they should cope with soaring energy costs by merely turning off the heating and wearing warmer sweaters. It gets quite cold in Germany in the winter, cold enough such that I don't think that sweaters would cut it. The vice president of the European Commission also suggested citizens should support Ukraine and the embargoes on Russia by taking fewer showers, not driving cars, and airing their clothes instead of washing them. Meanwhile, a new poll finds that around half of Germans fear being unable to properly heat their homes this winter as a result of energy shortages caused by the war in Ukraine. A survey conducted by the Institute for New Social Answers found that 75% of respondents are struggling with the burden of recent price hikes, with around 50% fearing they will have problems keeping warm in colder months. Germany is dependent on Russia for over a third of its gas, and Moscow has reacted to sanctions by reducing supplies via the Nord Stream pipeline. This, combined with soaring inflation across Europe, has prompted panic buying of stoves and firewood in Germany, with supplies of those being exhausted until next year. Oh no, that's not going to be very good for CO2 emissions, is it? Why don't they just restart their nuclear reactors? I mean, what's wrong with them? They gone loopy there? I mean, if you can't keep your population warm in winter, you have failed at a very basic test of competency. Let's look at the Russians with Attitude Twitter feed. How soothing it is to forget and how dangerous. That is a quote from Dune. Okay, I don't quite know the relevant. This is a retweet of something from Sarah Ashton Cirillo. This is the most painful update I have ever issued from Kharkiv. Some Ukrainian units are out of body bags and there is a shortage available to replenish them. Ukraine has already won, but the cost is high. Oh, is that how you note how you've won, that you run out of body bags? A Ukrainian member of parliament, Roxolana Pidlasa, condemns the decision by the general staff of the AFU to ban military-aged men from leaving their city of residence without permission from the authorities, and implies that this rule may be expanded to women. Press Secretary of Odessa Oblast Civil Military Administration, Bratchuk: there is every chance that the war will drag on, and most, if not all, of the men will go to war, as well as most of the women, since those troops that are now on the front line will need to be replaced. Wow. Is this going to turn out to be a Paraguay situation for the Ukraine? I don't know if you're familiar with the history of that South American country, but it is a sad one. They got into a war with their neighbors, the Paraguayan War. And how much did they lose? The normal estimate is that of a Paraguayan population of somewhere between 450,000 and 900,000, only 220,000 survived the war, of which only 28,000 were adult males. Yes, it's also called the War of the Triple Alliance. Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay against Paraguay. And Paraguay lost 25 to 33% of its territory to Argentina, and Brazil paid an enormous war debt and sold large amounts of national properties to stabilize its internal budget. The worst consequence of the war was the catastrophic loss of population. At least 50% of the Paraguayans died during the conflict, numbers which took many decades for the country to return to. Is that what Zelensky wants? I suppose there's going to be people here in the West who are going to be cheering, the women who are forced into the meat grinder. We're going to see a lot of yes, queen, etc., etc. Oh, okay. Julia McFarland, who is a journalist, broadcaster, newbie podcaster. Foreign affairs is in her DNA. ABC and BBC News. Okay. She has this to say. Moral of the story: there is a good reason to follow accredited, a bona fide journalist in this age of misinformation. Our reputations, jobs, and legal standing are on the line every minute on the job. Whereas any blogger at large can say largely whatever they like, inaccurate or not. Yeah, okay. Michael Tracy responded, you co-host a podcast with a former British spy chief and produce content for an American PR firm. But yeah, keep lecturing about the reliability of journalism sources. If Ukraine loses this war, and I believe that they're going to, if Odessa gets taken, then that's it. Ukraine becomes a rump state, which may subsequently be invaded by Poland and Lithuania and even Hungary. One wonders whether there'll be anything left. But, all our betters have been telling us for months now that Russia doesn't have a chance, that Putin is finished. He's a clown. He's dying. Nobody likes him. The Ukraine is going to win a crushing victory. How do you think that people are going to take it when they don't? Are they going to be further disillusioned? Are they going to be angry with the people who lied to them? Or are they just going to shrug and think or say, well, this is how it works now? We get lied to, and these people never get fired. From antiwar.com, White House won't push Ukraine to negotiate. Putin declares victory in Ukraine's eastern Luhansk region. Ukraine says it needs $750 billion for a recovery plan. They have truly lost their minds. Belarus says intercepts missiles fired from Ukraine. Russia demands Israel cease Syria airstrikes. Japan spots Chinese-Russian warships near Senekus. Yeah. Biden believes the world can still be ruled by Washington. More on this from Daniel McAdams. As Ukraine continues to lose ground in the east, its leaders are inexplicably demanding $750 billion to reconstruct areas controlled by Russia. Once widely considered the most corrupt country in Europe, Western leaders have already dumped in billions with zero oversight. Will they keep writing checks? Also today, Saudis laugh at Biden's request for more oil, and J.P. Morgan warns of $380 a barrel oil. Well, that couldn't possibly be true. We saw the last time that oil went over $150, the economy pretty much collapsed. It's this whipsaw effect that Jim Kunstler writes about. When the price of oil is low, and it got to be very low a couple of years ago, then all companies stop looking for oil. It's just not worth it to them. It's barely worth it for them to take it out of the ground in existing wells. And what happens then is that we get oil shortages and the price spikes. And if the price spikes high enough, the economy begins to fall to pieces. And there doesn't seem to be any way out of this, at least not one that I can see. Of course, we could have, transitioned to nuclear power decades ago. But no, there was a movie called 3 Mile Island, and there was another one with Cher in it. And that was enough. That was all that it took. This is from Max Keating at the Daily Caller. Dutch farmers use tractors to block roads and supermarket distribution networks to protest government-mandated emissions reductions that threaten their livelihoods on Monday. Over 40,000 farmers have taken to the streets in recent weeks to protest climate-related regulations that the Dutch ruling coalition itself concedes would force upwards of 30% of farmers out of business, Deutsche Welle reported. Farmers have dumped hail bales on roads, left manure outside government officials' homes, and blocked highways and other critical infrastructure to protest the regulations, according to the AP. The honest message is that not all farmers can continue their business, the government said in a June statement. The farmers contend that they are being unfairly targeted by the regulations and losing out on their future prospects. The Netherlands' largest airport urged its travelers Monday to use public transportation to get to its terminals amid fears that the farmers' blockades would target airports, and fishermen have also blocked a number of harbors this week in solidarity with farmers. The Dutch Ministry of Agriculture, Nature and Food Quality told the Daily Caller News Foundation that the present emissions reductions and resultant backlash trace back to a 2019 court ruling that found the Netherlands was not doing enough to protect its natural areas. Citing the ruling, the Dutch government introduced targets last month to halve nitrogen oxide and ammonia emissions, both of which are present in large quantities in livestock manure. The ministry told the DCNF that is working with farmers to look at a new way of doing business with innovation, relocation, extensification, and involving more nature in agriculture. Still, many farmers are disillusioned We cannot invest. Our fathers, our uncles cannot invest in the future, and so as young farmers, we have no prospect of taking over a farm. Marin van Hooyen, a 23-year-old Dutch dairy farmer, told Euronews. Malcolm Roberts tweets, "This is the end path of climate change activism. Eventually, everything has to be stopped, even our food supply. Dutch farmers are protesting new rules that will close farms and force them to kill off livestock to curb emissions. Godspeed to the farmers." Yeah, how about this? The Netherlands is the largest exporter of meat in the European Union and exported almost $100 billion worth of agricultural goods in total in 2019. The protests come as the world faces food shortages brought on by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and some fear that the ongoing supply disruption caused by the protests could increase prices in the Netherlands and beyond. Yes, the Netherlands is one of the world's major agricultural exporters, but I guess the government doesn't want that money. They don't want the farmers to be prosperous. They don't want the Dutch people to have food. Maybe we're going to be transitioning to eating bugs ahead of schedule. Or will simply be announced, for instance, that you can't eat meat anymore. That's it. You are going to have to become vegetarians or even vegans because, meat is destroying the world and we can't have it anymore. And sorry, there's nothing we can do. Well, there is. They could stop going insane over bogus models and faked data. School administrators, the worst people on earth. It's confirmed daily. William Cacuso has a thread. This has to be one of the wildest stories out of Portugal. 2 years ago, two parents in a small town of Famalicão became nationally famous after prohibiting their two boys from taking the class citizenship, arguing conscientious objector. You might ask why they would do this. The class in question had two subjects to which the parents objected. One, education for gender equality. Two, education for sexuality in health. The students in question are what you call Class A students, both with the highest possible grading average. We learn that sexuality is a social construct. Society expects male individuals to express themselves in so-called masculine way and female individuals in a so-called feminine way, conceiving these expressions as natural, scare quotes, and much more of this. The school, via the class council, the collegial pedagogical body that transits students at the end of each year, passed them favorably for next year, citing they were both exemplary students. The class council is sovereign and cannot be hierarchically surpassed by the school board. The school board decided to take the matters to the state, and the Minister of Education, João Costa, issued an order to retroactively annul the class council decision. This meant both students were to go back 2 years and do every single class again. It's important to add that the Ministry of Education had for years promoted a policy to reduce students from failing across the education system, even when they had negative grades. We know who this was made for. This was a very aggressive stand, taking into consideration the students were exemplary and the parents used a right protected by law and the Constitution when they argued for conscientious objector. Still, the minister was unfazed. The students were to go back. After many open letters to several ministries and the president of the Portuguese Republic to no avail, the parents decided to take the matter to court. This is when the news started to break out and it became a national story. The court gave them a favorable decision. The students were to pass the year and the minister had 10 days to contest. The Secretary of State was called into Parliament to answer for this authoritarian order. If you think this is sounding too good, you are right. The minister will get his revenge. The students passed the year and went back to normal class. By the end of the year, the school once again failed them, even though there was a court order against it. Well, the same judge that issued the favorable order, Telma Silva, decided to go back and cancel the order. The public ministry decided simultaneously to sue the parents and sent Social Security employees to evaluate the so-called household situation of the minors. Nasty stuff. By this time, the case was international, and Portuguese right-leaning politicians were organizing protests. The case was now very mediatic, and someone inside the Ministry of Education issued another order to keep the students in the same grade and allow them to pass to next year. The parents thanked the courage of this individual and believed the matter to be resolved. They politely asked the Commission for the Protection of Children and Young People and the Public Ministry to remove their court case or at least suspend it. They didn't. Fast forward to 2022. The Public Ministry, the Ministry of Education, and the Commission for Protection of Children and Young People decided to take the matter to the Family and Minor Court for the removal of the children from their parents, citing one, the parents jeopardize the formation, education, and development of their own children. Two, the parents are putting their own children under danger of psychic abuse. Three, the parents do not appear to be providing appropriate care or affection for the kids' age. Four, the parents subjugate them to parental behaviors that seriously affect their emotional balance. Five, the parents' attitude is emotional coercion. Six, they are acting outside the law and deciding what their kids learn as if they are judges. Seven, the minor children have juridical autonomy. You can see where this is going. Eight, the kids must be removed from the parents' care and placed under guardianship of the school. You heard that right. The minister, still embarrassed by the situation they put him through, is now going scorched earth, attempting to remove the children from the care of their parents because of gender equality classes. This is the most unbelievable thing that I've ever seen happen in my country, that is Portugal, and anyone with kids should be having chills down his spine. If you can help me spread this, maybe it can reach international media again and put some pressure to the politicians and ministers involved. Adding this tweet from a friend, which shows the court and the Ministry of Education accepting a 15-year-old gypsy girl's request to leave school in the name of tradition, because not every educational path must be the same. Just nasty. This is from William Cacusso, Cacusso. You might have thought I was exaggerating, talking about the parents or the family of the Cremo shooter in Illinois, saying that a great many parents are frightened, even terrified, that if they try to instruct their adolescent children, don't hang out with these people, don't listen to this, don't read this, no pornography or whatever, they will be denounced to guidance counselors or to social workers. It's not an idle threat in many, many places. But meanwhile, this is from Natalie Winters and Raheem Kassam, the National Pulse. A recent high-level hire at the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy defended a controversial gay prostitution website with a track record of allowing children to be promoted for sexual services on the platform. The revelations from an unearthed op-ed follow the National Pulse expose of appointee Samuel Britton's past as drag queen, alphabet people activist, who has lectured on kink at college campuses and participated in interviews about fetish role play. In an article published on September 15th on the pro-alphabet people website, The Advocate, Biden's latest top nuclear hire dives into a defense of the rentboy.com website, which shuttered following an August 2015 illegal prostitution raid. Rent boy is a colloquial term for young men who have sex with older men in exchange for money, often under dubious circumstances. Brinton, who now serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Spent Fuel and Waste Disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy, defended rentboy.com in a September the 2nd, 2015 op-ed in The Advocate, the real ramifications of the Rent Boy raid. The article followed a Department of Homeland Security officials raiding Rent Boy's Manhattan offices and arresting Chief Executive Jeffrey Harant and 6 employees on charges of promoting prostitution. The following year, the CEO of the site, which connected male prostitutes and escorts with potential clients, was indicted on a charge of promoting prostitution, to which he ultimately pleaded guilty. The U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of New York's indictment also revealed the site's negligence regarding underage sex work, particularly across Asia. It detailed how Rent Boy employees described the age verification process as a gray area, as they did not always remove advertisements when the advertisers failed to provide identification. In one case, after an escort agency failed to provide photo identification for an escort, a rentboy.com employee advised the escort agency that he had deleted photographs with the face of the subject escort, but left the advertisement online and left photographs that showed only the escort's body, explained the indictment. Concerning posts in Asia, Rentboy failed to comply with its own standards requiring age verification, even ignoring employees who complained to Rentboy management about the quantity of underage escort advertisements. Despite the deeply concerning developments, Brinton wrote in defense of the website, quote, sex work disproportionately affects the alphabet people community. Transgender people engage in sex work at a rate 10 times that of cisgender or non-trans women. And many alphabet people youth engage in sex work just to survive. A 2013 Center for American Progress report suggests that alphabet people youth are more than 3 times as likely to have engaged in survival sex, unquote. Okay, so transgender people engage in sex work at a rate 10 times that of cisgender women. And we're not supposed to draw any conclusions from that, are we? In another email, another rentboy.com employee speaking about the Asia market ads said, Christ, talk about copyrighted and underage pies. Tons in that area, always, detailed the indictment. Brinton firmly defended the company, claiming that the dissolution of Rentboy is more dangerous than the website ever was. The Rent Boys weren't harming anyone, he wrote, but now these young men might have to return to communities and homes which have rejected who they are. And yes, Rent Boys. And that's where the real danger begins. The federal government's recent attack on rentboy.com is a devastating assault on some of the most vulnerable members of our community. Yes, we must deal with people's vulnerabilities by forcing them into prostitution. This is where progressivism has led us. Rentboy.com may or may not have broken the law. I don't know, concedes Britain. But I do know from the frantic emails filling my inbox, why do so many people who know Brinton are so concerned with a site called Rentboy, that the raid on its headquarters has thrown many gay, bisexual, and transgender young adults into turmoil as their main source of income has been ripped away due to irresponsible and archaic views of sex work, unquote. Brinton is also an active member of the Washington, D.C. chapter of a drag queen society known as the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which lists him as the principal contact on his 2016 and 2018 tax forms. During the group's Lavender Mass 2021, Brinton can be seen referring to Anthony Fauci, who was declared a saint, as Daddy Fauci. And I'm not going to go into this pup play thing. It's just too disgusting. But you see it at the Pride marches. You see it at the Pride marches. Because this kind of degradation of men by men, you have to have a very archaic understanding of sexual mores to think that there was anything, depraved about that. And Canada is not going to be left behind, okay? This is from Paul Joseph Watson. At Summit News, Toronto police caused confusion on Twitter after posting about a missing woman, despite the accompanying picture showing a biological male with a goatee. Also a neck beard. News release, missing woman, Ryerson Avenue and Bathurst Street area, Isobella de Grace, 27, shared the Twitter post. She is described as 5'10", with a thin build, shaggy blonde hair, and a full goatee. The Toronto Police Service said she was last seen wearing a black t-shirt and gray pants. Apparently, observing Canada's gender identification rules is more important than accurately describing a missing person. Respondents on Twitter were quick to chime in. Yes, this went viral very quickly. Oh, this is sensitive content, according to Twitter. Sensitive content. Aldous Huxley's ghost had tweeted, "Missing dog, please help." And there's a picture of a tabby cat looking at the camera. Oh, imagine how triggering that must be. Has anyone seen my cat? And there's a picture of these, what were they, those giant rodents in the Andes that people eat for food. How are we supposed to find her when you post a picture of a dude? Asked another respondent. How would you describe this woman on the radio or via text? Asked another. If you laugh, it's a hate crime, joked one person. Despite the stupidity, Isabella de Grace was eventually located by authorities about 9 hours after posting the tweet. And let's talk about a stitch up. Okay. This is just standard operating procedure in Canada. This is a warm, happy story from Paige Parsons of the CBC. Deportations halted for two Edmonton families at the 11th hour. Two Edmonton families facing imminent deportation, one to Mexico, the other to the Philippines, have been granted reprieves. The families, both with young children, went public in recent weeks with concerns about safety should they have to return to their countries of origin. Luis Ubando Nolasco, Cynthia Carrasco Campos, and their 8 and 9-year-old daughters were supposed to be on a flight to Mexico Monday. The family fled to Canada in 2018 and sought refugee protection after a family member's homicide. The government rejected their applications to stay, and they were ordered to leave the country. A family member's homicide. Is that the best you can do, CBC? But the couple says that on Saturday they met with Edmonton Centre MP and federal tourism minister Randy Aboissonneau, who told them their deportation had been paused and they don't have to leave. I dropped to the floor. I cried a lot, Ubando Nolasco said Monday. The couple's lawyer, Rachel Anderson, said in an email Tuesday that Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada advised her over the weekend that Immigration Minister Sean Fraser authorized temporary resident permits along with work and study permits for the family. Anderson said the duration of the permit is unknown for now, but it will give them a chance to make their case using new evidence of the threats they face in Mexico. Why do I care? There's lots of places in the world that are violent. Does that mean that every single person in these places is Canada bound? It could mean that, because there's people like Andrew Coyne and Brian Mulroney that want Canada to have 100 million people. The planned July the 8th deportation of Evangeline Kayanan, whose 6-year-old Canadian daughter McKenna, wow, she's getting the hang of things quick, eh? McKenna, would be forced to go with her back to the Philippines, is also on hold, Kayanan's lawyer Manraj Sidhu confirmed. Sidhu said Tuesday that we're still waiting on official documentation from the Immigration Ministry. His understanding is that Kayan is getting a 1-year temporary residence permit, which will allow her to file more evidence as she makes a case to be able to stay. Kayan came to Canada in 2010 as a temporary foreign worker. She alleges she became undocumented after she reported to employers for alleged abuse. After her daughter's birth, she raised her on her own and became an activist. She won an award from the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights for her work fighting for healthcare access for the children of undocumented parents. Kayan is also a volunteer with Migrante Alberta, supporting migrant workers. Okay, this is a scam that's been going on for decades. Rich people in Canada want nannies, but they're not willing to pay Canadians to be nannies. And so they get them from the Philippines. These women from the Philippines sign contracts that they will work a certain number of years in Canada and then return back to the Philippines. But increasingly, they simply don't return. And then they can claim that, oh, no, my employers abused me, and presumably what? Chopped up your passport, your birth certificate, and the like. And you see what's going on here. These people are given longer to stay in Canada, and then they will make the argument that it would be cruel to them and their children because they have established deep relationships in Canada. The Liberal Party just wants fresh bodies to vote Liberal. They don't care that our immigration laws are a joke, and they cheer on the Great Replacement because it's good business. Well, good business for them. Migrante Alberta, they get money from all sorts of groups, but including from the Canadian Council for Refugees. And the Canadian Council for Refugees gets money from, guess where? The government of Canada. According to their annual report for 2020-2021, 38% of their funds come from federal government agencies. And there's other agencies listed there, which I didn't bother to check, but I can pretty much guarantee you also get money from the federal government. So, of course, the federal government pays money to NGOs which facilitate people breaking Canadian immigration law. It's good for business, don't you know? As mentioned previously, this is from Andrew Lawton at TNC News or True North. The Liberal government is poised to adopt the view that you can never be fully vaccinated against COVID, but have to get boosted every 9 months to keep your vaccination up to date. This is what Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos said, though he stopped short of announcing any policy changes for now. Andrew Lawson discusses the latest moving goalposts of public health and explains why Canadians should be nervous about a full-throttled return of restrictions and mandates in the fall. It seems pretty clear to me that so long as Justin Trudeau is Prime Minister, the various restrictions on travel, masks, quarantine, the like will continue. That he's determined to stick it to the unvaccinated. It'll be quite interesting if there's an attempt to bring back vaccine mandates, say in British Columbia. Could be dicey. This is from Chris Menahan of Information Liberation. The Wall Street Journal reported Monday that toddlers vaccinated during Pfizer's trial were more likely to get severely ill with COVID than those who received a placebo, and most kids who developed multiple infections during the trial were, wait for it, vaccinated. We don't know that if the vaccines are safe and effective. According to the Wall Street Journal, the rushed FDA action was based on extremely weak evidence. Most kids who developed multiple infections during the trial were vaccinated. This warranted more investigation since experimental vaccines for other diseases sometimes increase susceptibility to infection. Scientists are also discovering that triple vaccinated adults who were previously infected with the Wuhan variant have a weaker immune response to Omicron, leaving them more susceptible to reinfection. This phenomenon, called immunological imprinting, could explain why children who received 3 Pfizer shots were more likely to get reinfected. It's all crumbling down, isn't it? I haven't seen any apologies from anyone yet. Here's a story on the same issue from England and Wales, from Stephen Matthews and John Ely of the Daily Mail. COVID deaths in England and Wales remain below 25 per day, despite infections having almost doubled over the past month. Advocates of Number 10's strategy, which saw the final pandemic-era restrictions axed in April, have hailed the figures as more proof that the darkest days of the pandemic are over and that new economically damaging curbs aren't needed. Yet critics of the approach have already called for a return of mask wearing and for Brits to avoid meeting indoors because of the virus's resurgence. I wonder, is this Omicron variant, is it more or less dangerous than good old influenza? I'd like to see the numbers on that. This is from David Axe at the Daily Beast. The more times you catch the corona doom, the sicker you're likely to get with each reinfection. That's the worrying conclusion of a new study drawing on data from the U.S. Veterans Administration. Scientists stress that they need more data before they can say for sure whether and why COVID might get worse the second, third, or fourth time around. I have a pretty good idea why, but I probably can't say it on this live stream, so I won't. But with more and more people getting reinfected as the pandemic lurches towards its 4th year, the study hints at some of the possible long-term risks. We've seen a lot of famous people who are reporting getting COVID for the second time at least. Do you think that if they got it for the third time, do you think like Trudeau got it for the third time, that this would be admitted? I very much doubt it. I very, very much doubt it. Again, from the Mail, this is from James Fielding, Mark Dewell, and Martin Robinson. How can this happen again? Fury as Just Stop Oil eco vandals target 16th century copy of The Last Supper. Protesters glue themselves to yet another artwork at the Royal Academy just a day after they damaged Constable's The Haywain while security watched. Of course they did. Extinction Rebellion co-founder Simon Bramwell and fellow XR activist Casper Hughes were involved in the protest. Art student Jessica Agar, community organizer Tristan Strange, and ex-teacher Lucy Porter also take part. Protesters glued themselves to painting and spray painted the phrase "No New Oil" below the 20-foot artwork. Follows protests over the past week at the National Gallery and other galleries in London, Manchester, and Glasgow. Well, what can I say about this? That there should be exemplary sentences for all of the people involved in this, but I don't think that there are going to be exemplary punishments for the people involved in this, because English society is close to collapse. Let's go to the Daily Skeptic. Boris on the brink. Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid quit the government. Let's see what the latest on whether Boris has thrown in the towel. He made an extraordinary groveling apology that was about 7 minutes long on TV. He's appointed new ministers, and he is defiant, as they say. I'll be glad to see the back of him. The only difficulty is the strong possibility that whomever replaces him is going to be even worse. I didn't think it would be possible for Boris Johnson to have been worse than Theresa May. But here we are. Here we are. Again, I'm just going to confirm just the latest stories here, sorted by date. Here we go. Timeline, resign, on the brink. Boris Johnson fights to hold power after two top ministers jump ship. That's according to the New York Times. So I guess that's all we're going to get on that. Perhaps something will happen tomorrow. Financial Times censors criticism of vaccine article. The most liked and most commented upon comment below a Financial Times article about Coronadoom vaccines has been removed on the grounds that it violated our community standards. Will Jones reports that the president of Brazil says he regrets removing liability from pharmaceutical companies for vaccine side effects and is sorry for all the deaths. Hospitals bring back masks and social distancing as COVID admissions surge, but 2/3 are in hospital for something else. Yeah, it's all the same. All right, there's still only one disease that counts, and that's SARS-CoV-2. It's the only one. The rest of these diseases are wannabe diseases, and they need to be treated with the contempt that they deserve. Well, before I lose the thread here entirely, I've got to check in with Tainter and the collapse of complex societies. He's writing about the Chacoan collapse. Chacoan society of the San Juan Basin of northwestern New Mexico is known only from its archaeological remains. In contrast to the tropic setting of the Mayan area, the San Juan Basin is an arid region. Social complexity in this area evolved in response to a very different set of challenges, but collapsed for reasons that parallel those of the cases already investigated. The San Juan Basin is a structural subunit of the vast Colorado Plateau. Its 85,000 square kilometers consist of broad plains, sharply and frequently dissected by mesas and buttes of relatively low relief. It is surrounded by mountains and plateau of high relief. Topographic elevation over short distances in the central basin rarely exceeds 150 meters, while relief of 900 meters at the periphery is not uncommon. In the center of the San Juan Basin lies its major topographic feature, a Chaco Canyon, an east-west trending feature bounded on north and south by sharply rising cliffs, Chaco Canyon is an island of topographic relief and environmental variety in a sea of topographic homogeneity and environmental redundancy. The canyon has several major tributary drainages and so receives moisture from an extensive drainage basin. This is crucial for agriculture in an arid setting. For with characteristic spatial variability and localized summer rains, it is common to see some canyon drainages running while others are dry. Chaco Canyon thus maximizes the potential for capturing runoff from variable and often insufficient participation, and is unusual in the basin in this regard. In other ways, though, Chaco Canyon is not a good location for subsistence agriculture. It has, for example, some of the poorest soils in the region. The maize of the Hopi of northeastern Arizona takes about 115 to 120 days to mature. Southwestern archaeologists often use these figures to estimate whether any given area can support maize agriculture. The average growing season for the San Juan Basin is between 140 and 160 days. Yet at the elevation of Chaco Canyon, 1,866 meters, 60% of growing seasons are less than 120 days, and 30% are less than 100 days. The only permanent water in the canyon consists of about a dozen small seeps in the sandstone cliffs, the largest of which holds less than 380 liters. Recorded rainfall in Chaco averages 213 millimeters, but varies from 89 to 457 millimeters. Climatic conditions at the height of the canyon's occupation were similar to those of today. Dendrological or tree ring evidence suggests that between 900 and 1300 AD, rainfall averaged 221 millimeters. Temporal and spatial variations were critical in such a moisture-deficient area, and droughts adversely affected the Chacoans. Between 920 and 1040 AD, and 45% of years' precipitation was greater than the 100-year mean. Between 1040 and 1120, this figure increased to 55% of years. Yet between 1120 and 1180, only 10% of all years experienced participation above the 100-year mean. From 1123 to 1178 AD, only 11 years saw above average participation. A regional system of social complexity, political stratification, and economic symbiosis developed in this marginal environment on a scale unparalleled in the prehistoric northern Southwest. Although research is beginning to disclose the existence of regional systems that existed at other times and other places in the Puebloan area, the Chacoan system reached a level of hierarchy, complexity, and costliness that exceeded all others. And I will have more on the Chacoans from Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And today, let's talk about Christopher Rufo. And yes, it's not okay, groomers. This is an interview from Mark Granza in im1776.com. Christopher Rufo is an American activist, journalist, and senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, raised by Italian immigrants in Sacramento and educated at Georgetown and Harvard. Rufo spent the first part of his career working as a documentary filmmaker. His film projects include a documentary on American poverty, during the course of which his views became more conservative. He also reported on the issue of homelessness in America and ran for Seattle City Council in 2018. In 2020, his life took a consequential turn when an employee of the city of Seattle just documented a whites-only anti-bias training session and sent him the evidence. Rufo thus began his work as an activist, collecting and publishing evidence on diversity training conducted by U.S. government bodies, schools, as well as corporate America. He's often credited with having single-handedly convinced then-President Trump to issue an executive order which prohibited federal agencies from spreading such doctrines, after reportedly being noticed on Fox News' Tucker Carlson, and has been at the forefront of the legal fight against progressivism ever since. Over the past year and a half, his efforts focused mainly on pushing legislators to enact state bans on the teaching of critical race theory and radical gender indoctrination in American schools, with significant success on both fronts. As part of our series of interviews with dissident figures, we decided to reach out to Christopher for an interview to learn about his strategy and plans for the battles ahead. And it begins with a quotation from Rufo. We have to realize that the game is not to debate the epiphenomenon of ideology, but to relentlessly unearth, attack, and dislodge the broader structural phenomenon that underpins it. Rufo says, I'm an activist by accident. I never intended to become one, but through my reporting at City Journal on homelessness and then CRT, I discovered the missing link to so many political problems was not knowledge, but action. I wanted my reporting and policy work to lead somewhere constructive, to move people, reshape narratives, and transform into law. So through a process of trial and error, I developed my own very unique form of political activism. In many ways, I'm an unlikely figure for shaping public policy. I live in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, far away from the power brokers in New York and DC. I detest attending meetings and decline most invitations to speak with groups or political leaders. I generally do not participate in rallies, campaigns, protests, or public demonstrations. But I've figured out how to build narratives and shift public opinion, which are the two essential preconditions for political action. I built a studio in my house that connects directly with the satellite desk at Fox News in New York, as well as a network of sources, partners, and publishers that has generated billions of media impressions per year. And on the back end, Rufo reports, I have a great team that manages relationships with legislators so that we can advise on public policy. The biggest lesson I have learned is that the secret to successful activism is not muscle, but information. The man who can discover, shape, and distribute information has an enormous amount of power. The currency in our postmodern knowledge regime is language, fact, image, and emotion. Learning how to wield these is the whole game. He is asked, getting parents to unite in order to achieve political goals is an unusual strategy. Where did you get that idea? Rufo responds, it happened again by accident. I did a series of reports on CRT and education that sparked a lot of discussion. And then I started noticing these incredible clips circulating on social media of parents speaking it at school board meetings. It was totally spontaneous at the beginning. Then I put together a critical race theory briefing book and worked on model policies, which gave people the language they needed to succeed and a template for policymaking at state legislatures. The secret to good activism is not mass, but leverage. The narratives about CRT sparked an immense public response, and politicians, who are always looking at the intensity of voter sentiment, started to deliver laws that protected their constituents and protected families from indoctrination. The GOP then adopted a smart frame, parental rights, the Parents' Party, that created a set of policies and connotations that is very appealing to families. In the most recent generic ballot polling, parents with children in the home support Republicans by a 28-point margin. He is asked, one of the persistent issues faced by opposition activists is the problem of defining the contemporary regime. You've successfully popularized the term critical race theory to characterize the current regime ideology, but how do you see the relationship between this ideology and the big corporate and political forces promoting it? Do you view them as motivated by sincere ideological commitments? Rufo responds, there are the true believers, but for most people it is a rationalization. The executives at Xerox and Walmart are not sincerely committed to CRT, but the entire incentive structure that surrounds them creates an enormous pressure to adopt these beliefs, at least as status markers or reputational insurance policies. It is much easier to bend the knee for George Floyd and write a $10 million check to Black Lives Matter than to say no. For conservatives, we have to realize that the game is not to debate the epiphenomenon of ideology, but to relentlessly unearth, attack, and dislodge the broader structural phenomenon that underpins it. This means attacking it on moral, aesthetic, financial, legal, and bureaucratic grounds, in addition to the more straightforward style of intellectual debate. Governor DeSantis understands this better than anyone. He demonstrated in his fight against Disney that conservatives have leverage against corporate power as long as they are willing to use it. The trick is to replicate that strategy across multiple domains and to shift incentives by changing the law. He is asked, many of your critics argue that courts are the proper place to challenge CRT or radical gender instruction, not schools. What do you think are the limitations and deficiencies of that strategy? Rufo responds, it's like telling a boxer, fight with your right fist, but not your left fist. There are three branches of government, executive, legislative, and judicial. And an activist who doesn't look for angles in all three domains is simply incompetent. Or in the case of people like David French, they aren't actually on your side and don't want you to win. It's best to ignore, marginalize, and repel these people. They can invent all kinds of sophisticated rationalizations, but at the end of the day, they have a kink for losing. That's it. And a response between David French and Christopher Rufo. French had tweeted, growing up in a conservative Christian public school, it never crossed my mind that I shouldn't be exposed to contrary ideas, even very challenging contrary ideas. And it never crossed my mind that my teachers should be censored from expressing their own opinions on matters. Oh, really? So if your teacher starts ranting in favor of Hitler and National Socialism, that wouldn't have caused a furor? Hmm? Rufo responded, David running defense for the government separating children by race, telling them that they are oppressors or oppressed based on their skin color, and inculcating ancestral blood guilt as the basis for social justice. Just another blessing of liberty. Because David French infamously described a drag queen story time as one of the great blessings of American liberty. Some on the right, most notably Curtis Yarvin, have questioned the idea that banning or opposing CRT in schools actually works. The gist of the argument is that since the administration in charge of enforcing the bans is itself woke, progressive teachers could safely avoid the bans by simply changing CRT's language, thus technically complying with the law while still pushing the doctrine. What do you think are the limitations of banning CRT in schools? Rufo responds, Curtis is a man who prefers the distant to the near. He is entirely too pessimistic. Of course, I concede that simply passing anti-CRT legislation is not enough in itself, but policymakers have a range of solutions, including overhauling teacher training, eliminating Department of Education bureaucracies, and providing universal school choice so that every family can take their children's education dollars to any institution of their choosing, including private, religious, and homeschool programs. There is a strand of dissident thinking on the right that believes the republic is hopelessly corrupted and that we must transcend it. I disagree. There is a lot of good in this country, and most of our institutions can be renewed, reformed, or abolished and replaced as necessary. Machiavelli writes that the Roman Republic was able to renew itself for centuries through the rule of good men and by returning to its beginnings. There is a spiritual longing in this country to renew the foundations of America. There was a television image that symbolized this for me. During the height of the pandemic, the authorities in Los Angeles banned the use of fireworks, and yet that night there was spectacular drone footage of the entire city, millions upon millions of people launching a beautiful bombardment of fireworks into the sky. These people living in a blue city and during a pandemic lockdown still had the spirit to defy the authorities and celebrate the birth of the country. It's there. It is up to us to awaken it and marshal it for a greater good. In an infamous interview with BNC News, Mark Lamont Hill asked you to name, quote, something positive about being white, unquote, to which you answered by effectively avoiding the question and its implications, listing instead a series of practices and concepts the left deems to be white supremacist. Is there any way you wished you had answered differently? Rufo responds, Douglas Murray has a passage in his new book, War in the West, in which he tells the story of my interview with Mark Lamont Hill and says I took the polite and respectable route in my response. Murray argues, however, that if the left keeps pushing the racialist narrative, people of European descent will stop being polite and begin to argue that their ancestors have created, quote, a tradition that has given the world a disproportionate number, if not most, of the things that the world currently benefits from, unquote. There is obviously truth to the latter. The West has an extraordinary legacy spanning 3 millennia, from philosophy to the arts to representative government, modern economy, and technology. But I still believe we should approach this with humility. There is a danger of simply replicating the frame of the racialist left, which is a mistake in the complex and pluralist society like the contemporary United States. And furthermore, as we learned from the European experience in the 20th century, adopting a totalizing racial identity as a basis for politics is a path to destruction. We should be honest and unashamed about the accomplishments of the West, but remember that our lives are ultimately not abstractions, and that racial identity is not a substitute for a rich individual life. Civic nationalism, again, from Christopher Rufo. I think that civic nationalism is, well, exhausted because the people on the other side, including the elite of the so-called model minorities, let us know every single day in many ways that they hate our guts, they want us gone, that they want us dead. But before we're dead, we're going to have to be punished and humiliated beforehand. I don't think that it is possible to act, politely, demurely with people like that? Oh, no, no, no. You're not thinking this through. Yes, your people, whoever your people are, have suffered so very much in the past. That's a losing argument. It just is. I'm going to have a final look at the chat. Okay, let's get back to it here. I think it's time for me to get a new trackball. They only last, I don't know, about 9-12 months before they start getting very sticky, slow you down. Thank you for your kind words, Don Willis. Art Bell says, Weave, KMG is the only newsman who gets two double beds. I think they're bigger than double beds. I think they're king-size beds, actually. Art Bell says KMG was the first to say of senseless criminal events, as Biden says, there is no sensible or sense-making sad criminal event. Well, you see, here's the difficulty. That lunatics and sane people think differently. I'm sure it's possible that this Cremo fellow had what he believed were good reasons for what he did, but these reasons make sense to nobody. It's not like, one has to condemn murder, but, Anders Breivik, he had a plan. He was going to mobilize people in Norway by what he did. Well, it doesn't seem to have worked, and it was evil, but it was not wholly irrational. And Art Mob, a new name? Is that a new name? Thank you, Kevin, and listeners. A good show today. Well, thank you. Always appreciate it. I'm waiting for the KMG mumble rap single to be made. Chaco collapsed because of too many drugs, is strategically adaptive meme plaques. Let's see. Another POG, person of grievance's sole purpose is to serve rich liberals in their gated, non-diverse communities. Exactly, Kevin. I've seen this firsthand. These rent seekers are so very tiresome. Oh, the structural racism. Well, the structural racism doesn't seem to stop you from being on the CBC on a regular basis by being offered a column in the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail or the Hill Times or whatever. This, of course, look, if there's structural racism, white supremacy in our country, the immigrants to our country wouldn't be overwhelmingly from the third world and likely to be hostile. That would be the first thing to stop. The second thing to stop was that Canada would repeal affirmative action or quotas, which were instituted in 1986. None of these people who discuss so-called structural or systemic racism in Canada and white supremacy und so weiter, they never mention affirmative action, which has been around for 36 years. Jogakin 666 says this guy likes spent fuel rods. Yeah. And on that, oh wait, here's a comment from Che Blutarski. If natural gas is phased out, then there goes the production of most nitrogen fertilizers. Crop yields would drop precipitously. Corn acres would drop and be replaced by beans and buckwheat. Look, these green people, the Green Revolution people, some of them are openly deep green. Some of them are deep green that won't admit it. Some of them are too stupid to understand that the imposition of their policies would result in a vast Malthusian die-off. Billions of people would die, especially in Africa and Asia. Art Mob points out that Mike Tracy, Max Blumenthal, and Aaron Mate have been excellent and attacked mercilessly as a result. That has to do with their comments about what's happening in the borderlands. So that's it for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I greatly appreciate it. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interact at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I'm going to work in one more comment from Max Vitriol. The Paraguayans revere Rutherford B. Hayes to this day because, right or wrong, they credit him with negotiating the peace treaty. As always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.